Well, hello and welcome to Chapter 19 of Menace in the Goldilocks Zone. As you recall, if you've been following along, our intrepid band of explorers has finally left Arborea for Kryptos, and they've had a couple of strange encounters on the way. And one such encounter occurred at the end of Chapter 18, and as we left them, we've heard Burleson ask again of Peregrine, specifically this time, "What is it?" "It's a message," she replies, "but not for us." "How do you know?" Forge Dem asks. "Because I know who sent it." "Who?" Roger asks. "A very hopeful and very naive people," Peregrine replies sadly. "Let it go. It's all that's left of what was good in them." So now we begin Chapter 19, Needles and Haystacks. The atmosphere on the Rotvine becomes grim and dark. Close encounters with two more raiders has convinced Forgedem and Broadtrunk that the safest course of action is to run dark, so people move about with small portable lighting devices. Frustrated with his inability to paint under such dim conditions, Roger has placed canvas over his porthole and spends most of his time in his room, where at least he can have the lights on. Meals, when he attends them, are brief and consumed in murky silence. Kryptos looms large in the view from the cockpit when Peregrine breaks a days-long silence at the 261st change of watch. "We are approaching the end of our journey," she says, apropos of nothing. "I thought we had better discuss our strategy." "Do we have an idea on where we should at least begin looking?" Roger asks. "Only in the most general terms," Peregrine replies. "My information is that what we are looking for is in the northern hemisphere in a range of extinct volcanoes." "What is it that we are looking for exactly?" Burleson chimes in. "Our ultimate goal is to recover 4 ancient artifacts," Peregrine informs him. "But these are not likely lying around on the surface. What we need to look for are the remains of an old, ancient even, base or settlement. The artifacts are likely there." "We will also need a source of fresh water," Forgedem reminds them, "not only for our own use, but for the fuel synthesizer. We aren't going to get very far without refueling, even if we do find the artifacts." "I say we use shuttle to look," Broadtrunk suggests. "Shuttle can fly low, can glide, use small fuel." "Good idea." Forgedem nods to Broadtrunk. "We'll use the shuttle for aerial surveys." She pauses a moment. "And I nominate the Admiral to conduct the surveys. Those cerulean eyes of his don't miss a thing." "I accept the nomination," Roger says. "It will be a refreshing change to be doing something useful, and not simply be brooding in the dark." "We'll need to modify the co-pilot seat," Nourdam points out. "Mr. Roger has always been strapped in the cargo area when he rides a shuttle, and you can't see much from there." "You can't see anything from there," Roger corrects her. "All right, Nourdam," Forgedem says. "You work with the Admiral and the exec here to modify his seat for the shuttle. We'll take up a stationary orbit while you perform the surveys. Once we locate water, and that should be the first objective, we'll send the freighter down to start making and collecting fuel while we search for the ruins." "I must warn you all," Peregrine says solemnly. "If you encounter anything technological, a piece of machinery, the remains of a shelter, withdraw immediately. We must proceed with great care and great caution." The planning meeting seems to energize everyone, not just Roger. Forgedem and Broadtrunk agree that since they are so close to Kryptos, the lights can come up again on the Rotvine. This lifts everyone's spirits even more. Lutterson, Forgedem, and Gatherdam are once more flying between the walkways, and Forgedem doesn't seem to mind a bit. Roger throws himself into the modification of the shuttle's co-pilot seat. The simplest solution, he suggests, as the three of them stand on the shuttle staring at the co-pilot seat, might be to take the cargo platform from the back and install it here. He can see Broadtrunk working out the translation, so repeats it to him, taking care to be looking at him. Yes, but then you're tied down like a piece of baggage, the Arborian replies. Which I would imagine would get uncomfortable. Unless we have extraordinarily good luck, you're going to be spending hours strapped down like a shipping container. No, that won't do, Roger admits. He translates Broadtrunk's reservations to Naurdam. The exec is right, sir. I can't see that you'll be able to spend hours tied up like a bundle. She looks Roger over thoughtfully, then back at the seat. What if, she says tentatively, we were to tilt the seat backwards? The longer back would support your abdomen, and the seat would support your thorax. Your limbs would be free on either side. Roger relays the proposal to Broadtrunk, who nods. We can try it, he says. Roger watches as Naurdam and Broadtrunk work at removing the seat from its current configuration. They evidently use the occasion to teach others some vocabulary. Wrench, Naurdam says, holding up the tool. Broadtrunk repeats, wrench. Then Broadtrunk says, wrench, to which Naurdam responds, wrench. It took Roger a moment to realize that his device was translating the word regardless of the language it was spoken in, but that realization did little to relieve the tedium the exercise provoked. Every object and action had been named 4 times, and Roger could jump for joy when they finally got the seat detached. They lay the seat on its back, on the pedestal supporting it, so that Roger can test it for comfort. He straddles the now horizontal seat and settles in, resting his thorax on the now perpendicular seat. I think this will serve nicely, he says, although it would be more comfortable if there were a gap here, he points to where the back and seat meet, that way my front legs wouldn't be so constrained. He was looking at Naurdam when he said this, so he repeats his remark to looking at Broadtrunk. Yes, I see, the exec says. I don't think we can modify this seat, but we might be able to put something together with other parts. Roger conveys this to Naurdam, who replies, I think we have something on the freighter. She leaves as Roger translates the remark to Broadtrunk. Well, we can get this out of here, he says, while we wait. The two carry the seat through the airlock and deposit it on the Rotvine. Admiral, Broadtrunk begins as they walk back through to wait for Naurdam on the shuttle. Were you in the cockpit when we encountered something a few weeks back? Yes, Roger replies. Well, would you mind confirming some details for me? Forgedem mentioned it in passing at the watch change, but I've overheard Burrowson telling Naurdam about it. It was in Mare Urban, of course, so I might have misunderstood some things. Well, what do you want to know? This object, the captain said she thought was an old probe of some kind. She didn't mention that to me, Roger muses, but I suppose that could be true. Peregrine said it was a message. Yes, good. I got that part right then, Broadtrunk says. But then she didn't say what the message was. Well, no. She made it clear that she didn't want to, so we didn't push it. I got the impression there was something unusual on the probe. Yes. There was a plaque of some kind that contained images. One was a diagram that could have been a star chart, or could have simply been a symbol. I don't know. There were also 2 drawings of figures, of people. They were very simple drawings, but one of the figures resembled Peregrine in some very specific particulars. So you think it was a Nebulan probe? I suppose so, Roger admitted. That would be logical, except when Peregrine saw it, she spoke in a language that my device couldn't translate. And if your device is Nebulan, it should have been able to translate Nebulan, Broadtrunk observes, which suggests that the language wasn't Nebulan. I suppose so, Roger muses, but then Peregrine seems to know a lot of languages. Yes, that is true. It is Broadtrunk's turn to become thoughtful. Tell me, do you believe that Peregrine is telling us everything? What do you mean? Is she being forthright? Is she telling us everything she knows about this intelligent machine, for example? Roger looks toward the airlock, hoping for an interruption. One does not appear. No, he says finally. I know she's not. She told me herself she wasn't. And yet you trust her? Yes, I trust her to tell us what we need to know when we need to know it. Really, what else can we expect? We could expect her to tell us what she knows and let us decide whether it's important or not. I sincerely believe that she would, Roger says solemnly, if she thought she could. I can tell keeping things from us is distressing her, but she is prevented somehow, from being forthright, as you say. I get the feeling she's trying to protect us. Oh, I have no doubt that she means well, Broadtrunk assures him. But don't you find it a bit condescending? It's like the Aredians. We're so much more technologically advanced than you, so don't worry your simple little heads about these Zonosian raiders or making things. Just give us your worthless raw materials, and we'll see that you are kept safe and get some shiny toys. I don't think the Aredians mean it that way, Roger protests. I think they really just want to help. That may be, but the help is always on their terms, Broadtrunk counters. And with Peregrine, it's worse. We are helping her, and it's still on her terms. What was it your brother said about selling the tree but wanting to keep the fruit? You seem to want things on your terms, whether you're receiving the help or giving the help. Broadtrunk's features take on an amused expression. I suppose you're right, he admits. I just don't like it when I don't have all the information. I told you that Peregrine was secretive, Roger reminds him. Besides, I don't think even Peregrine has all the information. You may find this difficult to believe, Broadtrunk replies, still looking amused, but I don't find that at all reassuring. Nourdam reappears with parts of chairs and platforms that they decide can be adapted to the needs at hand. Broadtrunk leads them back onto the Rotvine to a cabin Roger had never seen before. It was stocked with an impressive array of tools and other equipment. I had this installed so that artisans and other craftspeople could work while in transit, Broadtrunk explains. At the time, I suspected it was a gross extravagance. It should come in handy now. It is the day before Roger's seat for the shuttle is assembled and installed. Roger's role in this is to hand Nourdam and Broadtrunk tools and to test the fruits of their labor. Yes, he says, in what is the final fitting, this should do nicely. He then spends the next 2 days studying high-altitude surveys conducted by the Aredians more than 200 years ago. It is unlikely that these will contain any clues, Forsdam says of the surveys, as the Aredians would have investigated, but you can at least familiar yourself with the topography. The topography appears to be monotonous and mountainous. The range of volcanoes runs north and south like a spine, with smaller, more weathered peaks ranging to the east and west. Many of the taller peaks appear to have been capped by snow or ice when the survey was done, but no other sources of water are apparent. The Rotvine has to go dark once again as it approaches Kryptos, because Peregrine and Forsdam fear being spotted by Aredian patrols from the base. Once the vessel takes up its stationary orbit over the search area, which is on the opposite side of the planet from the base, the lights return. Roger walks to the cockpit to see the planet up close and compare his survey maps to the real thing. What he beholds is an orb shrouded in clouds and mist. The landscape is invisible. He looks at Forsdam, who is in the pilot seat. I know, Admiral, I know, Forsdam says before Roger can speak. Let's hope that cover is high and shallow. And if it's not, you'll do the best you can, I'm sure. Peregrine has called a briefing at change of watch, Roger informs her as he waits for a walkway to align with the cockpit. I'll be there. The watch changes all business. It is decided that Nourdam and Broadtrunk will alternate flying Roger on 2 reconnaissance missions per day. The others will remain on alert on the Rotvine until a good source of water is found, at which point Brosen and Fordson will be left behind to mine the Rotvine and monitor Aredian communications and other events from above. Everyone else will take the freighter and the shuttle and establish a base camp at the source of water, and from which the search for ruins will continue. We'll have to run that fuel synthesizer all day and night if we are to refill the Rotvine anytime soon, Forsdam notes. And we'll have to use the freighter to carry the fuel as we did on Arborea. which means that even if we find ruins, we won't investigate further until the Rottwein is refueled, Peregrine adds. We may have to leave in a hurry. When do we begin the search? Roger asks. I would wait until dawn tomorrow, Forrestem says. That way you can rest up and we can begin with the daylight. Your first task will be to see how deep that cloud cover is, Peregrine adds. That will determine how much ground you can cover in a day. Dawn sees Roger strapped into the modified seat with Nourdam at the helm. They determine they will start at the southern end of the mountain range and fly an east to west, west to east zigzag pattern as they work their way north. Their hope is that the ceiling of clouds is high enough that they can spend much of the time gliding, only using fuel to change direction and climb to a higher altitude to resume a shallow glide. The descent through the clouds is rough. Roger's thrown this way and that against his restraints, while Nourdam pilots with fierce concentration. Roger's goggles report her muttering, "Strike scat," under her breath more than once. They break through the cover abruptly to behold the rocky, mountainous landscape the Iridian survey maps had promised. That appears to be this peak here on the survey map, Roger points out. We can use that as a reference point. Is the ceiling high enough for a long glide? Not as high as I would like it, Nourdam says dryly, but it's high enough. Roger looks down as Nourdam flies west back into the cloud cover to begin a west to east glide. She brings the shuttle about and descends through the clouds again. Deploying glide fins, she announces as Roger's goggles report a mechanical whir and the craft abruptly ascends briefly as if caught by some invisible giant hand. Cutting engines, Nourdam announces. The shuttle drops briefly, then shudders intermittently as it glides. The ground passing under them is well lit in spite of the cloud cover, although shadows are indistinct. We may have to pass over the same ground twice from the opposite directions, Roger remarks. This diffused light makes the shadows tricky. Oh, that will double our search time, Nourdam replies. But we need to be thorough, or we might as well not bother. Roger stares at the rocky terrain passing swiftly beneath them. Is there a way to go slower, he asks? Things go by awfully quickly. I'll see what I can do, Nourdam replies. Our glide can't be too shallow or we'll stall and crash. Oh, Roger says anxiously. Never mind. I'll just have to concentrate. Roger stares down the rugged terrain. He's eventually able to distinguish rockfalls and deep canyons among the jagged peaks. Vegetation is very sparse, and nowhere does he see water. The climate is apparently quite arid. Just when he is able to distinguish smaller features, like individual boulders and brush, Nourdam fires up the engines to ascend and turn to glide back in the opposite direction. It is a small comfort, but Roger sees that he was right about the shadows. He is able to pick up other details as he passes over the same area from the opposite direction, but none of those details include any bodies of water. They repeat this procedure several times, then come to the end of the watch and return to the Rottwein in silence. It is clear that Kryptos will not give up its secrets easily. The conversation at the change of watch meal, once Roger gives his report, is scant and consists primarily of Roger translating Nourdam's observations on their flight to Broadtrunk. From these, Roger gathers that Nourdam struggled to maintain control of the shuttle much more than she let on. The peaks and valleys of the terrain they were searching evidently created a great many cross-currents of air that demanded almost constant correction. Roger had, up to that point, thought his job was exhausting, and he is grateful that he had not expressed that. Roger and Broadtrunk strapped themselves into the shuttle after the meal. "How's your seat?" Broadtrunk asks casually as he conducts a systems check. "Quite comfortable," Roger replies. "You and Nourdam did an excellent job." "She is quite capable," the exec agrees, "especially as a pilot." The two descend in silence through the turbulent cloud cover, and Roger points out a distinguishing feature of the landscape to serve as a reference point. Broad Trunk begins their first pass from the east, and again Roger stares at an unrelenting vista of craggy promontories and deep ravines. And so the days pass monotonously, with no sign of water or of ruins. Roger begins to search in his dreams, sometimes flying over a giant survey map laid below him, sometimes sailing above the rugged terrain in a skiff. In one dream, the map and the terrain merge into one. After that, Roger found he no longer had to consult the map. He could look at the terrain and know exactly where he was. It is the 20th day of searching, and their methodical approach has brought Broad Trunk and Roger midway up the spine of the mountains that make up the haystack in which they search for a needle. The sky darkens, which Roger first takes to mean that the daylight is fading, but an abrupt, bright flash momentarily illuminates the ground under them. "There's a storm coming," Broad Trunk notes grimly. The shuttle suddenly jolts and dips as if to confirm the fact. "Perhaps we'd better call it a day," Roger says, as a ribbon of lightning arcs from a cloud to strike a mountain peak. The almost immediate concussion striking the shuttle confirms the bolt's proximity. "I second the motion," the exec says as he restarts the engines and begins an ascent. Heavy rain starts to beat on the hull. Roger looks back at the receding ground, eyes aching. Another ribbon of lightning arcs across the sky, and for a fraction of a second, Roger thinks he sees a ring of mountain peaks pointing down. He turns away and leans into the seat. "I need some rest," he says despondently. "I hope this storm lasts a good, long time." It does. For 3 days, Roger watches the great swirling mass of clouds obscure even the high cloud cover, and at night he can even see the relentless flashes of lightning. Watch changes are depressed affairs as Broad Trunk calculates and recalculates how many more sorties they can make with the shuttle before dipping into emergency fuel reserves, and Peregrine refuses to consider another plan. As grateful as he is for the rest, Roger cannot help feeling frustrated at the lack of progress and the growing tensions in the group. He awakens on the 4th day from another dream. In his dream, he is back in Mare Urba, standing in the glassy river looking upstream. Sky and the tall grass are reflected in the river as if there were another world under the surface of the river, upside down. He jumps off the sleeping platform to look out his window at Kryptos. The great swirling mass of clouds had moved on to the west of the mountain range, and there are even breaks in the high cloud cover. He rushes out of his cabin to get to the galley, stopping halfway when he realizes he had neglected to don his communication device. He rushes back to fetch the device and puts it on as he moves down the walkway. He is just making final adjustments to his goggles when he enters the galley and announces to the sullen assemblage, "I know where the water is." So that ends chapter 19. Next chapter's 20, oddly enough, called Skin and Bones. Thank you for watching and listening. There is an opportunity for you to make comments or questions. You can go to the Fedora Fiction Press Facebook page and leave your impressions or comments. You can also leave comments on the YouTube page. So again, thanks for listening. We will see you next time in another week with chapter 20.